Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into one of the most fascinating what-if scenarios in the Harry Potter universe. What if Harry Potter and Hermione Granger weren't just best friends, but actually brother and sister? How would this single change ripple through the entire story, transforming relationships, altering key moments, and potentially changing the outcome of the war against Voldemort himself? Stick around because we're about to explore every twist and turn of this alternate magical timeline. Before we jump into the deep end, we need to establish how this sibling relationship could actually work within the existing lore. The most logical explanation would be that Hermione was adopted by James and Lily Potter shortly before their deaths. Perhaps the Grangers in this timeline were close family friends of the Potters who tragically died in an accident when Hermione was just a baby or toddler. Being the kind and compassionate people they were, James and Lily would have immediately taken in their friend's daughter, raising her as their own alongside Harry. This means Hermione would have been about a year old when Voldemort attacked the Potter family on that fateful Halloween night in 1981. Another possibility is that Hermione could be James Potter's daughter from a previous relationship before he married Lily, making her Harry's half-sister. However, this seems less likely given James's character and his devoted relationship with Lily. The adoption scenario feels more true to who the Potters were as people, and doesn't require us to rewrite James and Lily's love story. Either way, what matters is that Harry and Hermione grow up knowing they're siblings, bound by blood or by love, and that connection changes everything. Now here's where things get immediately complicated. When Voldemort murders James and Lily Potter and the killing curse rebounds off baby Harry, what happens to young Hermione? In the original story, Harry is sent to live with his horrible aunt and uncle, the Dursleys, because of the blood protection charm Lily's sacrifice created. But Hermione doesn't share that blood connection with Petunia Dursley. This means she likely wouldn't be sent to Privet Drive at all. The most probable scenario is that Hermione would be placed with her maternal grandparents, assuming they're still alive, or perhaps with other relatives from the Granger side of the family. This means Harry and Hermione would be separated as toddlers, which adds a heartbreaking layer to their story. Imagine Harry growing up in that cupboard under the stairs, barely remembering he once had a sister, while Hermione grows up in a loving home but with a deep sense of loss and incompleteness, knowing her brother is out there somewhere but being kept from him. The magical authorities, particularly Dumbledore, would likely have arranged for minimal contact between the siblings during their childhood years. Dumbledore would rationalize this separation as necessary for Harry's protection, believing that keeping Harry isolated at the Dursleys was essential for the blood magic to work. He might also fear that Voldemort's followers, still lurking in the shadows, could use Hermione to get to Harry if the connection between them was widely known. So for 10 long years, Harry and Hermione are kept apart, each growing up with only the faintest memories or photographs of the other. This separation profoundly impacts both of their childhoods. Harry's experience remains largely the same, locked away in ignorance and abuse at the Dursleys, treated as an unwanted burden. But now there's an additional layer of pain because he has fragmented memories of a sister, a girl with bushy brown hair who used to be there in his earliest memories, and then suddenly wasn't. The Dursleys, being who they are, would absolutely refuse to speak about Hermione, probably telling Harry he imagined her or that she was just a dream. This gaslighting would make Harry's isolation even more pronounced. Meanwhile, Hermione grows up in a completely different environment. Raised by loving relatives who tell her all about her brave parents and her famous little brother, she becomes somewhat obsessed with the wizarding world from a very early age. Even before getting her Hogwarts letter, she would be devouring any information she could find about magic. About the Potters, about what happened that Halloween night, and most importantly, about Harry. Her natural intelligence and thirst for knowledge would be amplified by this personal connection to the wizarding world's most famous story. She wouldn't just be studying magic academically. She'd be trying to understand the world her brother lives in, the world that took her parents and changed both their lives forever. This childhood separation also means that when Hermione discovers she's a witch and receives her Hogwarts letter, the moment carries even more weight. It's not just an invitation to a magical school. It's her ticket to reuniting with her brother. She would spend that entire summer before first year in a state of anxious excitement, preparing obsessively not just to succeed at Hogwarts, but to finally meet Harry again. to reconnect with the only family she has left from her first life. Now we arrive at the Hogwarts Express on September 1st. In the original timeline, Harry meets Ron first and then later encounters Hermione in a somewhat antagonistic way when she barges into their compartment looking for Neville's toad. But in this timeline, everything changes from the very first moment. Hermione would be actively searching for Harry on the train. She'd know what he looks like from photographs and from the descriptions she's heard all her life. The moment she spots that messy black hair and those round glasses through a compartment window, her heart would stop. Picture this scene. Harry is sitting alone in a compartment, or perhaps just settling in, when the door slides open and a girl with impossibly bushy brown hair and bright eyes stands there, tears already streaming down her face. Before Harry can even ask who she is, she whispers his name like a prayer, like something she's been holding on to for 10 years, and then she's rushing forward, throwing her arms around him in a hug that's both desperate and joyful. Harry would be completely bewildered at first, not understanding who this crying girl is or why she's hugging him like she never wants to let go. But then she pulls back, looks at him with those tearful eyes, and says something like, "Harry, it's me. It's Hermione. I'm your sister." And in that moment, everything clicks into place for Harry. Those fragmented memories, those dreams he thought were just his imagination, they were real. She was real. He had a sister, and she's here. She's actually here. And suddenly he's not alone anymore. The reunion would be incredibly emotional, both of them crying and hugging and trying to talk over each other. 10 years of separation pouring out in a flood of questions and emotions. This changes the entire dynamic of Harry's first year before Hogwarts even begins. He's no longer the lost boy who knows nothing about the wizarding world, because Hermione has been studying it for years specifically to understand their shared heritage. She can explain things to him, tell him about their parents from what she's learned, help him process everything that's happening. And Harry, who has spent his entire life being told he's worthless and unwanted, suddenly has someone who chose to find him, who's been waiting for this moment, who loves him unconditionally because they're family. When Ron Weasley enters their compartment looking for a seat, he finds not just Harry Potter, but Harry Potter with his sister, both of them holding hands like they're afraid to let go of each other again, both looking slightly red-eyed from crying. Ron, being Ron, probably makes some awkward comment about not knowing Harry Potter had a sister, and Hermione, protective and probably a bit defensive, might explain tersely that they were separated as children. Ron's friendship with Harry still forms, but it's now a friendship with both Potter siblings from the start, which fundamentally alters the trio dynamic we know and love. The traditional trio of Harry, Ron, and Hermione is now more of a quartet energy, or perhaps more accurately, it's Ron becoming friends with the Potter siblings as a unit. Hermione's know-it-all tendencies might be slightly softened because she's not trying to prove herself to make friends. She already has the most important relationship secured. She has her brother back. Her intellectual showing off would be more about sharing what she's learned specifically to help Harry catch up and understand his heritage, rather than seeking validation from her peers. The sorting ceremony becomes incredibly interesting in this scenario. In the original timeline, Hermione's sorting took a while, suggesting the hat considered Ravenclaw before ultimately choosing Gryffindor. But with Harry as her brother, waiting to be sorted and needing her, would the hat's decision be different? There's an argument that Hermione's loyalty to Harry, her fierce protectiveness of her family, would make her Gryffindor placement even more certain. The moment the hat touches her head, it would sense her burning determination to stay with her brother, to protect him, to never be separated from him again. Gryffindor, without question. When Harry's turn comes and he sits beneath the sorting hat, the conversation would be different too. The hat would still sense his qualities, would still suggest Slytherin could help him on the way to greatness, but Harry's response would be even more firm. Not only does he want to avoid Slytherin because of what he's learned about dark wizards, but his sister is in Gryffindor. After 10 years apart, there's absolutely no way Harry Potter is going to let a magical hat put him in a different house from Hermione. His choice would be immediate and unwavering. Gryffindor, because that's where his family is. The relief and joy on both their faces when Harry joins Hermione at the Gryffindor table would be palpable. They're together, finally, truly together, and they're in the same house, will sleep in the same tower, will share classes and meals in this new magical life. For Hermione, It's the culmination of years of hoping and planning. For Harry, it's the first time in his memory that he's had someone who's unconditionally on his side, someone who's family. Their relationship in those early days at Hogwarts would be touching to witness. Hermione would be intensely protective of Harry, almost motherly, despite being the older sibling by barely a year. She'd make sure he's eating enough at meals, remembering what the Dursleys were like from the stories she's heard. She'd help him with homework, not in a condescending way, but patiently teaching him things she's already studied, filling in the gaps in his knowledge. And Harry, for his part, would be equally protective of Hermione in different ways. He'd defend her when other students mock her for being a know-it-all, would include her in everything, would never let her feel left out or unwanted the way he was made to feel for so long. Their bond would actually help Hermione's social development. In the original timeline, Hermione struggled to make friends initially because she came across as bossy and superior. But with Harry's emotional support and their obvious close relationship, other students would see her differently. She's not just the annoying girl who knows all the answers. She's Harry Potter's sister, and the way they care for each other would be evident to everyone. This might actually help her be more relaxed and less defensive, which could prevent some of the early social conflicts she experienced. The troll incident in the bathroom would play out completely differently, and this is where we see the first major plot divergence. In the original story, Hermione is in the bathroom crying because Ron made a cruel comment about her having no friends, and she doesn't know about the troll until it's too late. But in this timeline, Hermione isn't friendless and isolated. She has Harry, and probably through Harry's influence, she's on better terms with Ron from the start as well. She wouldn't be crying alone in a bathroom, so when Quirrell announces the troll in the dungeons, Hermione would be right there with Harry and Ron in the Great Hall. But here's where her character really shines differently. The moment she hears about the troll, her first instinct might actually be to go look for it, not out of foolishness, but because she spent years studying magical creatures in danger specifically so she could protect Harry when they reunited. She might suggest they go investigate, believing that knowledge and preparation make them capable of handling it, that they can't just hide while there's danger in the school. Harry, knowing his sister's brave but sometimes reckless confidence in her own knowledge, would be torn between keeping her safe and knowing that arguing with Hermione when she's made up her mind is nearly impossible. Ron would probably be the voice of reason, pointing out that they're first years and trolls are 12 feet tall. But the three of them would stick together regardless, and when they do encounter the troll, perhaps saving another student or confronting it for a different reason, the fight would showcase their already developing teamwork. Hermione would be shouting out information about troll weaknesses and suggested spells even while terrified. Harry would be trying to protect her while also acting on her advice. Ron would still have his moment of bravery, perhaps even more pronounced because he's protecting both Potter siblings now. And when it's over, when they've somehow survived this encounter, the bond between the three of them would be sealed even more firmly than in the original timeline. They're not just friends who met on a train, they're people who've faced mortal danger together and survived. Professor McGonagall's reaction to finding them would be complicated. She'd be furious at the danger they put themselves in, but also deeply concerned specifically about the Potter siblings. McGonagall was close to James and Lily, and seeing their children together, looking after each other, would hit her emotionally. She might be stricter with them because of it, because she feels responsible for keeping them safe in a way that goes beyond her normal duty as head of house. Her punishment might be harsher, but it would come from a place of caring that both Harry and Hermione would eventually understand. As the school year progresses and the mystery of the Sorcerer's Stone develops, having Hermione as Harry's sister changes the dynamic significantly. In the original story, Hermione is the brains of the operation, but there's always a slight distance, the understanding that ultimately this is Harry's battle because he's the one Voldemort is after. But as Harry's sister, Hermione's investment is personal in a way it wasn't before. This isn't just her friend in danger. This is her brother, the last of her family, and she'll be damned if she's going to let anything happen to him. When they discover that someone is trying to steal the stone and that Snape, as they believe, is behind it, Hermione's research becomes even more intense. She's not just helping Harry solve a mystery, she's trying to protect her brother from a threat she doesn't fully understand yet. Every clue they uncover, every piece of the puzzle they fit together, it's personal for her in a way that makes her even sharper, even more determined. The night they decide to go after the stone, The confrontation between them would be more intense. Harry would desperately want to keep Hermione safe, would argue that she should stay behind, that he can't bear to put her in danger. But Hermione would absolutely refuse, would point out that they've never been separated when it mattered, that she's not about to start now. She'd remind him that she's the older sibling, even if only by months, and that protecting him has been her purpose since the moment she learned she had a brother. Her logic and determination would win out, though Harry's protective instincts would be warring with his need for her help the entire way. Ron's role in this becomes interesting too. He'd see how much the siblings mean to each other, and rather than feeling like a third wheel, he'd probably feel honored to be included in their circle. When he suggests he should go with them after the stone, it's not just loyalty to Harry, it's loyalty to both of them, to the family unit they've become. The three of them proceeding past Fluffy, surviving the devil's snare, navigating the challenges together. It all still happens. But there's an additional layer of emotion because Hermione and Harry are constantly looking out for each other specifically. When they reach the chess game and Ron makes his sacrifice, Hermione's reaction would be even more anguished. Ron has become not just Harry's best friend, but hers too, part of their extended family. Watching him get hurt to save them would be devastating. But she'd also know they have to keep going, have to finish what they started. When Harry insists she stay behind and go back for Ron while he faces whatever's ahead alone, the argument would be fiercer than ever. Hermione would refuse point blank. She'd tell Harry that she's not letting him face Voldemort or Snape or whatever evil is waiting without her. She'd point out that Lily Potter died to save him, and she's not about to dishonor their mother's sacrifice by abandoning him now. Harry would be terrified for her, but he'd also know that stubborn set to her jaw, that fire in her eyes that says she's not backing down. They'd compromise, deciding that she'll come with him but stay back, ready to go for help if needed. When they enter the final chamber and discover it's not Snape but Professor Quirrell, and then that Quirrell hosts Voldemort himself, Hermione's presence changes everything. In the original timeline, Harry faces this alone, and his mother's love protection saves him when Quirrell tries to touch him. But with Hermione there, Voldemort's attention would be split. He'd see both Potter children, and his reaction would be complex. Curiosity about the girl who shares the boy who lives blood, anger at being thwarted by not just one Potter but two, and perhaps a twisted interest in what having both of them might mean. Quirrell might try to use Hermione as leverage against Harry, or Voldemort might speak to her directly, trying to understand the connection between the siblings, trying to use psychological manipulation to turn them against each other. But he'd fail because the bond between Harry and Hermione is absolute. When Quirrell moves to attack, Hermione would position herself as a shield for Harry just as instinctively as Harry would try to shield her. Her presence might actually strengthen the protection because she carries the same love that Lily had, that self-sacrificing devotion to family. The climax would be more chaotic but also more powerful. Harry would still be the one who ultimately defeats Quirrell through touch, the protection burning through the man possessed by Voldemort. But Hermione would be there, perhaps weakened by Quirrell's attempts to curse her, perhaps injured from trying to defend Harry, but there. And when Harry collapses, when the pain and stress and magic take their toll, Hermione would be screaming for help, holding her little brother, refusing to let him go. The aftermath in the hospital wing would be deeply emotional. When Harry wakes up, the first face he sees would be Hermione's, tear-stained and exhausted from maintaining a vigil at his bedside. She'd have been there the entire time, refusing to leave, eating meals at his bedside, sleeping in the chair next to him. Dumbledore's visit would address both of them, and his conversation about Lily's love and sacrifice would carry additional weight. He'd look at Hermione and tell her that she carries that same capacity for love, that same strength, and that together, the Potter siblings represent something Voldemort could never understand or defeat. The conversation about the mirror of Erised would also come up, and it would be particularly poignant. Dumbledore would gently ask Harry what he saw in the mirror that night he stumbled upon it. Harry might hesitate looking at Hermione before admitting that he saw his family, his parents alive, and Hermione there with them, all together and safe. Hermione would reach for his hand, tears in her eyes because she understands that longing so completely. She'd probably admit that if she'd looked in the mirror, she would have seen the same thing. Dumbledore would explain the Sorcerer's Stone's destruction, and both siblings would understand why it had to be done, even though it means losing a chance at resurrection for their parents. They'd have each other, and in many ways that's what matters most. The rest of their hospital wing recovery would involve their friends visiting, particularly Ron, who'd be sheepishly proud of his chess sacrifice and relieved that his friends are okay. The end-of-year feast would be interesting, especially when Dumbledore awards points for their adventure. He'd acknowledge both Potter siblings specifically, commending their bravery and their loyalty to each other. The house points might be distributed slightly differently, perhaps with Hermione earning extra points for her quick thinking and vast knowledge that proved essential to getting past the protections. Gryffindor would still win the House Cup, and the celebration would be sweet, but for Harry and Hermione, the real victory is simpler. They survived their first year together, proved they can protect each other, and they're going home knowing they'll see each other again. But here's where things get complicated again. Summer holidays. Harry has to return to the Dursleys because of the blood protection, but where does Hermione go? In this timeline, she'd likely return to wherever she's been living, probably with her maternal grandparents. The separation would be painful for both of them after a year of being inseparable. They'd exchange letters obsessively, probably owning a shared owl or making heavy use of Errol and later the Weasley owl service. Hermione would also probably become more involved with the Weasleys during summer, perhaps visiting Ron and meeting his family, which would give her a sense of the warm, chaotic family life she's been missing. Mrs. Weasley would absolutely adopt Hermione emotionally, clucking over her and Harry both, feeding them until they're stuffed, and making sure they both have hand-knitted sweaters for Christmas. The Weasleys would become extended family to both Potter siblings, a support system they desperately need. There's also the question of Sirius Black, and this becomes fascinating. In this timeline, when Sirius escapes from Azkaban in what would be the third year, he's not just coming for Harry, he's coming for both of his godchildren. Because surely if James and Lily adopted Hermione, Sirius would have been named her godfather as well, or at the very least would consider himself responsible for her. His wanted posters would probably mention both targets, and the fear would be that he wants to finish what Voldemort started by killing both Potter children. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about second year first, the Chamber of Secrets, because this is where having Hermione as Harry's sister creates massive changes to the plot. In the original timeline, Hermione is the one who gets petrified by the basilisk, leaving Harry without his research expert for a crucial portion of the year. But if Hermione is Harry's sister, would J.K. Rowling's narrative structure, if we're thinking about this as a story, allow her to be taken out of commission the same way? Actually, Hermione being Harry's sister makes her being petrified even more impactful and potentially more likely. Think about the emotional devastation it would cause Harry to have his sister, the only family he has, frozen in a death-like state. The terror and helplessness he'd feel would drive him even harder to solve the mystery of the chamber. When he finds that piece of paper in Hermione's petrified hand with the information about the basilisk, the wave of pride and grief would be overwhelming. Even while petrified, even while facing a monster his sister was thinking, was solving the puzzle, was trying to protect people. Ron's support during this time would be crucial. He'd see his best friend falling apart with worry over his sister, and he'd step up in ways maybe he didn't in the original timeline. Ron would help Harry investigate more actively, would refuse to let Harry sink into despair, would remind him that Hermione is strong and that they're going to figure this out and save her. The friendship between Ron and Harry would deepen through this shared mission to save Hermione. When they discover the entrance to the chamber in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, Harry's determination to go down there would be absolute. That's where the monster is, and that's what he needs to destroy to save Hermione. Lockhart's presence would be even more of an annoyance, because Harry has no patience for the man's cowardice when his sister's life is on the line. The confrontation in the chamber, facing the basilisk and Tom Riddle's memory, would be fueled by Harry's love for Hermione and his rage at what's been done to her. Tom Riddle would probably taunt Harry about Hermione, would point out that she's dying slowly, that even if Harry survives the basilisk, she'll die anyway because nobody knows how to cure petrification caused by indirect basilisk viewing combined with dark magic. He'd be cruel about it because that's who Riddle is, and it would only make Harry fight harder. When Fawkes arrives with the Sorting Hat and Harry pulls out the Sword of Gryffindor, his battle with the basilisk would be desperate and fierce, driven by the need to save his sister and Ginny Weasley. Destroying the diary, watching Tom Riddle dissolve while screaming. And then the rush to get back to the castle with Ginny would be frantic. Harry would be desperate to tell Dumbledore what happened so they can start brewing the Mandrake restorative draft if it isn't ready yet. The moment when Hermione is finally cured and wakes up would be incredibly emotional. Harry would be there, waiting. And when her eyes open and focus on him, when she whispers his name, the relief would bring them both to tears. Hermione would immediately start asking questions, wanting to know what she missed, how they solved it, if everyone is okay. Harry would tell her about the chamber, about the basilisk, about how her research was what saved everyone. He'd show her the fang-scarred diary, explain how he destroyed it, and Hermione would put together pieces that even Harry hadn't quite understood yet about the dark magic involved. Their conversation would be interrupted by various visitors, Ron bursting in to hug Hermione in relief, Dumbledore coming to debrief them, professors and friends stopping by. But later, when it's quiet and just the two of them, Harry would admit how terrified he was, how the weeks with her petrified felt like losing her all over again, like they were separated as children. Hermione would hold his hand and promise that she's not going anywhere, that they're stuck with each other for life. It would be a reaffirmation of their bond, strengthened by surviving another year of danger. Third year brings Sirius Black into the story, and this is where everything gets really interesting. From the moment Harry and Hermione learn that Sirius Black has escaped from Azkaban and is supposedly coming after Harry, Hermione would be on high alert. She'd spend the summer researching everything she could find about Sirius, about what he did, about how he betrayed their parents. Her anger would be ice-cold and dangerous. Because this man didn't just betray James and Lily, he betrayed their entire family, including her. When they finally return to Hogwarts and learn about the Dementors stationed around the school, both siblings would have negative reactions, but Hermione's would be particularly telling. Dementors force you to relive your worst memories, and for Hermione, that might be the night she learned about her parents' deaths, or the years of separation from Harry, or the moment she was petrified and felt herself freezing, unable to protect her brother. The Dementors would affect her almost as badly as they affect Harry. The introduction of Remus Lupin as defense against the dark arts teacher would be complicated and emotional in this timeline. Lupin knew James and Lily, was friends with them, and seeing both of their children together, looking like such a perfect blend of the Potters and carrying themselves with that same brave recklessness, would be bittersweet for him. He'd be protective of both siblings, perhaps even more attentive than he was in the original timeline. When Lupin teaches them the Patronus charm, both Harry and Hermione would struggle with it, but for slightly different reasons. Harry's worst memory is still hearing his mother's death, but now it might also include memories of being torn away from Hermione as a toddler, of growing up alone and incomplete. Hermione's worst memory might be similar, the years of not knowing her brother, of feeling like part of her was missing. Their Patronuses, when they finally succeed, would be interesting. Harry's would still be a stag like his father, but Hermione's might be something that represents protection and family, perhaps a doe like Lily's, or something else entirely that symbolizes her fierce loyalty. The revelation about Sirius would hit different in this timeline. When Harry and Hermione learn the truth that Sirius is actually innocent, that he's their godfather who's been suffering in Azkaban for 12 years for a crime he didn't commit, the emotional impact would be doubled. This isn't just Harry's godfather, this is their godfather. Another piece of their lost family suddenly restored to them when they make the decision to help Sirius escape. Both siblings would be completely united in their determination. The scene in the Shrieking Shack would be intense, with Hermione standing beside Harry as they confront Sirius, wands out, demanding the truth. When Peter Pettigrew is revealed and the whole story comes out, Hermione's reaction would be particularly violent toward Peter. This rat-like man caused their parents' deaths, caused Sirius's imprisonment, caused their separation and all the pain that followed. Her rage would be cold and controlled but absolute, and it would probably be Harry who'd have to hold her back from doing something they'd both regret. The time-turner sequence would still need to happen to save Sirius and Buckbeak, but the dynamic would change. Instead of Harry and Hermione going back alone, they'd face the decision together as siblings. Hermione would explain the dangers of time travel, the risks involved, but also why it's necessary. Their loop through time, saving Buckbeak, watching their past selves, And then rescuing Sirius would be a joint operation where they're constantly watching each other's backs. When they successfully help Sirius escape on Buckbeak, his parting words to them would address both siblings. He'd tell them how proud James and Lily would be of them both, how seeing them together reminds him of their parents, how he hopes to be part of their lives properly one day soon. For Harry and Hermione, gaining Sirius would be like finding an anchor, a connection to their parents and their past that they've never had before. Fourth year in the Triwizard tournament would be absolutely transformed by Hermione being Harry's sister. When Harry's name comes out of the goblet of fire and everyone believes he entered himself, Hermione's reaction would be immediate and fierce. She knows Harry didn't put his name in, knows him better than anyone, and her defense of him would be public and uncompromising. She'd confront students who accuse Harry of cheating, would argue with anyone who doubts him, and her reputation as the brightest witch of her age would lend credibility to her support. The moment Harry's name emerges from the goblet, shot into the air on that tongue of flame, Hermione would go pale. She'd be sitting at the Gryffindor table, and the blood would just drain from her face because she knows, absolutely knows, that Harry didn't do this. When Dumbledore calls Harry forward and the Great Hall erupts in confusion and anger, Hermione would be on her feet immediately, pushing through students to get to Harry, to stand beside him, to make it clear that whatever is happening, he's not alone. The interrogation in the room off the Great Hall, with the champions and judges and heads of schools, Hermione would force her way in. McGonagall might try to stop her, telling her this is for champions only. But Hermione would pull rank as Harry's sister, would argue that if someone put Harry's name in that goblet without his consent, then he needs family present, needs someone who will advocate for him when the adults in the room might not. Dumbledore would allow it, seeing the fierce protectiveness in her eyes that reminds him so much of Lily Potter. During that meeting, when Barty Crouch Sr. insists the goblet constitutes a binding magical contract and Harry must compete, Hermione would be arguing, citing magical law precedents, pointing out that a contract signed under duress or without informed consent should be voidable. She'd be pulling out every legal argument she can think of, her voice getting higher and more desperate as she realizes they're not going to let Harry out of this. When it becomes clear that Harry will have to compete, that there's no way around it, Hermione would look at her brother and see the fear in his eyes, and she'd squeeze his hand and promise him that they'll get through this together, that she'll help him prepare, that he's not going to die in this tournament. The walk back to Gryffindor Tower that night would be tense and emotional. Students would be whispering, some congratulating Harry, others muttering about cheating, and Hermione would be glaring daggers at anyone who dares suggest Harry wanted this. In the common room, when the other Gryffindors crowd around demanding to know how Harry did it, Hermione would snap at them, her voice cutting through the noise, telling them that Harry didn't enter, that someone is trying to hurt him, and if they were really his housemates, they'd be concerned instead of celebratory. Ron's jealousy and abandonment of Harry would be more complicated in this timeline. Ron would be fighting not just against feelings of being overshadowed by Harry, but also against the sibling bond that he can never quite be part of no matter how close they are. When he stopped speaking to Harry, he'd also be pulling away from Hermione, and she'd be caught in the middle, furious at Ron for abandoning her brother when Harry needs support most, but also understanding Ron's feelings to a degree. The confrontation between Hermione and Ron about his treatment of Harry would be explosive. She'd corner Ron in the common room or drag him into an empty classroom and let him have it, asking him how he could abandon Harry now, when someone is literally trying to kill him, when Harry needs his friends most. Ron would throw back that Harry always gets the attention, always gets the glory, and Hermione would get right in his face and tell him that Harry never asked for any of this, that being famous for your parents' murder isn't glory, it's trauma. She'd point out that Harry would trade all the attention in the world to have a normal life, to have what Ron has, a living family and anonymity. The fight would end with both of them angry and hurt, with Ron storming off and Hermione returning to Harry, trying to hide how upset she is because Harry needs her to be strong right now. Hermione's support during the tournament tasks would be even more intense than in the original. She'd research obsessively, helping Harry prepare for each task with a desperation born of genuine fear for his life. The first task with the dragon, the second task in the lake, every moment Harry is in danger. Hermione would be on the edge of her seat, barely breathing until he's safe. Her relief when he survives each challenge would manifest in tight hugs and perhaps angry rants about whoever put him in this situation. In the weeks leading up to the first task, Hermione would practically move into the library. She'd be pulling every book on dragons, on defensive magic, on the history of the Triwizard tournament. She'd be taking notes obsessively, organizing information, creating study guides for Harry. When Harry discovers from Hagrid that the first task involves dragons, and he tells Hermione, she'd already have 17 books on dragons stacked on a table in the library, already be cross-referencing their weaknesses and behavioral patterns. The strategy session for the dragon task would be intense. Hermione would lay out all the options, from conjunctivitis curse to stun the dragon's eyes, to transfiguring objects into diversions, to using broomstick flying to outmaneuver it. When Moody suggests the summoning charm to bring Harry's firebolt, and Harry latches onto that idea, Hermione would drill him on the Accio charm for hours. She'd practice with him in empty classrooms, summoning objects from increasing distances, making sure his pronunciation is perfect, his wand movement exact. She'd push him until he's exhausted, and when he complains, she'd remind him that exhaustion is better than being roasted alive by a Hungarian horntail. The morning of the first task, Hermione would barely be able to eat breakfast. She'd be sitting next to Harry at the Gryffindor table, both of them pushing food around their plates, and she'd be giving him last-minute reminders, last-minute encouragement. When it's time for Harry to go to the champion's tent, Hermione would walk with him as far as she's allowed, would hug him tight and tell him to be smart, be quick, and come back to her in one piece. Harry would promise he'll try, would attempt a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes, and then he'd be walking away, and Hermione would be fighting the urge to run after him. Watching the first task from the stands would be agony for Hermione. She'd be sitting with her hands clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms, watching as Harry enters the rocky enclosure and faces the horntail. Every movement of the dragon, every burst of flame, every moment Harry is in danger, Hermione would flinch. When Harry successfully summons his firebolt and takes to the air, she'd be on her feet along with the rest of the crowd, but her cheering would be mixed with prayers under her breath, magical theory about aerodynamics, and dragonflight patterns running through her head as she tries to predict what will happen next, the moment when the horntail breaks free of its chain and chases Harry. Around the castle would stop Hermione's heart. She'd lose sight of him, wouldn't be able to see what's happening, and the not knowing would be worse than watching. When Harry finally returns with the golden egg, injured but alive, Hermione would be pushing through the crowd to reach him, not caring about proper procedure or waiting areas. She'd get to him in the medical tent where they're treating his shoulder injury from the dragon's tail, and she'd be simultaneously hugging him and scolding him for scaring her like that, tears streaming down her face while she laughs with relief. The celebration in Gryffindor Tower that night would be bittersweet. Harry tied for first place with Victor Krum. Everyone is partying, but Ron still isn't speaking to Harry. Hermione would stay close to Harry all evening, making sure he's okay both physically and emotionally. She'd notice him touching his injured shoulder, would see the distance in his eyes when the noise gets too loud, and she'd understand that he's processing trauma, that facing a dragon isn't something you just bounce back from. Late in the evening, when the party is still going strong, Hermione would pull Harry aside, suggest they go up to the dormitory or find somewhere quiet, and they'd end up on the stairs leading to the boys' dormitory, sitting together in the dim light, talking about how scared Harry was, how scared she was watching him. The arrival of the other schools and the Yule Ball announcement would create new complications. Victor Krum's attention to Hermione would be more pronounced because she's not just another student, she's Harry Potter's sister. Victor, being a professional athlete and a champion, would see Hermione as both an intellectual equal, someone who talks to him about things other than Quidditch, and as a connection to Harry, his competition in the tournament. When Victor asks Hermione to the ball, she'd be genuinely surprised and flattered, but also suspicious of his motives. She'd accept, but with her guard up, watching for any sign that he's trying to use her to get information about Harry or to get into Harry's head before the tasks. Harry's reaction to Hermione going to the ball with Victor would be complicated. On one hand, he'd be protective, worried that Victor might be trying to manipulate his sister. On the other hand, he'd also see how happy Hermione is to be asked, How she lights up when she talks about Victor treating her like a person rather than just a brain or just Harry Potter's sister. Harry would give Victor the shovel talk, would pull him aside at some point, and very calmly explain that Hermione is his sister, the most important person in his world, and if Victor hurts her or uses her or makes her cry, Harry will find a way to make him regret it. Tournament be damned. Victor would respect the protectiveness, would actually appreciate that Hermione has someone who looks out for her so fiercely. The Yule Ball itself would be a memorable night for different reasons. Hermione would look stunning in her periwinkle blue dress robes, and Harry's reaction to seeing his sister all dressed up would be a mixture of pride and a weird protective awkwardness that makes Hermione roll her eyes and tell him to stop looking at her like that. Harry would attend the ball with Parvati Patil, as in the original timeline, but his attention would keep drifting to Hermione and Victor, making sure his sister is having a good time, making sure Victor is being respectful. Ron would spend much of the ball sulking and jealous, and the eventual confrontation between Ron and Hermione would still happen, but with added weight. When Ron accuses Hermione of fraternizing with the enemy, of betraying Harry by going with Victor, Hermione would explode. She'd point out that she doesn't need Ron's permission or approval for who she spends time with, that Victor treats her with respect, and that she's been spending every spare moment helping Harry prepare for tasks that could kill him. So don't you dare question her loyalty to her brother. Harry would try to mediate, uncomfortable with his best friend and his sister fighting over him. But Hermione would storm off, angry and hurt, leaving Harry and Ron in awkward silence. The period between the first and second tasks would be consumed with trying to figure out the golden egg's clue. Harry would spend hours listening to the ear-splitting wail, trying different approaches, getting increasingly frustrated. Hermione would be researching egg-related magic, water-related magic, trying to find a pattern or a key. When Cedric Diggory gives Harry the tip about the bath, and Harry finally figures out the mermaid song, he'd immediately go find Hermione, excited and relieved. They'd analyze the clue together, breaking down the lyrics about retrieving something precious from the lake depths within an hour. The realization that the second task involves hostages would make Hermione's blood run cold. Something precious to each champion will be taken and held underwater, and she knows with absolute certainty that she'll be Harry's hostage. There's no one else it could be. No one more precious to him than his sister. The knowledge that she'll be put in danger, used as bait, would make her angry at the tournament organizers, at the ministry officials who thought this was acceptable. But she'd also be practical about it, would research everything she can about underwater survival, about magical sleep, about what Harry will need to know to save her. Harry would be equally certain that Hermione will be his hostage, and the thought of her trapped underwater would fuel his preparation. He'd research gillyweed, bubblehead charms, underwater navigation, every possible method of surviving underwater. When Dobby provides the gillyweed just before the task, Harry would be grateful but also terrified because it's all coming down to this, to trusting in magic he's never used before to save his sister from drowning. The second task morning would be surreal for Hermione. She'd know what's coming, would try to prepare herself mentally, but when the officials come to take her, when they cast the spell that puts her into that enchanted sleep, her last conscious thought would be of Harry, hoping he knows what he's doing, hoping he'll be careful. Harry, waiting at the lake with the other champions and not seeing Hermione anywhere, would feel sick with worry even though he knew this was coming. When Dumbledore explains that what they'll lose has already been taken and is waiting in the lake, Harry's hands would shake as he takes the gillyweed. The underwater sequence would be nightmarish for Harry, swimming through murky water, following the mermaid song, finally reaching the hostage area and seeing Hermione suspended in the water, eyes closed, looking pale and lifeless. For a moment, Harry's heart would stop. Irrational fear that she's actually dead overwhelming him before he remembers this. His magical sleep. She's okay. He just needs to get her free. When he sees Ron tied up as well, and then Fleur's little sister Gabrielle, and realizes Fleur hasn't come yet, Harry's protective instincts toward siblings in general would kick in. The decision to save both Hermione and Gabrielle, despite the merpeople's warnings that he should only take his own hostage, would be driven by Harry's inability to leave a little girl to drown, to leave someone's sister in danger. He'd struggle with both of them, Hermione and Gabrielle both dead weight in the water, trying to swim them both to the surface before his gillyweed wears off. The panic when he starts running out of time, when his gills start to fail and his lungs start burning, would be offset by sheer determination. He's not leaving his sister down here, and he's not leaving Gabrielle either. Breaking the surface of the lake with seconds to spare, gasping for air, making sure both Hermione and Gabrielle are breathing, would be one of the most terrifying moments of Harry's life. Hermione would wake up coughing up water, disoriented and cold, and Harry would be there, wrapping her in towels that officials provide, checking that she's okay. Hermione would be shivering and confused, asking what happened, where they are, and Harry would explain while holding her close, trying to warm her up. The aftermath of the second task would include the judges' deliberation. Harry, coming in second despite being the only champion to rescue 2 hostages, the moral fiber versus rule-following debate, would be something Hermione would have opinions about once she's recovered. She'd be proud of Harry for saving Gabrielle, would tell him that following his conscience was more important than winning points. Fleur Delacour would be incredibly grateful to Harry for saving her sister, would kiss his cheeks and call him a true champion, and would treat both Potter siblings with warmth and respect for the rest of the tournament. The period before the third task would be filled with intensive training. Harry preparing for unknown challenges in a maze, Hermione helping him practice every defensive spell and navigational charm she can think of. They'd spend hours in empty classrooms, Hermione conjuring obstacles and challenges for Harry to overcome, pushing him to think on his feet, to react quickly. The modified training would include strategy discussions about what might be in the maze, based on the previous task's themes of facing fears and protecting others. Ron's reconciliation with Harry and Hermione would happen gradually during this period. Seeing how hard they're both working, how scared Hermione is for Harry, how much pressure Harry is under, Ron would feel guilty about his jealousy. He'd start helping with the training, would bring them food when they skip meals to practice, would stand watch while they use empty classrooms. The first time Ron actively helps with training, conjuring practice dummies for Harry to disarm, both Harry and Hermione would look at him with grateful relief, and Ron would know he's forgiven without any of them needing to say it explicitly. The night before the third task, Hermione wouldn't be able to sleep. She'd sit in the common room long after everyone else has gone to bed, and Harry would come down from the boys' dormitory, also unable to sleep. They'd sit together by the dying fire, not saying much, just being together. Hermione would eventually break the silence, admitting that she has a bad feeling about this task, that something feels wrong about the whole tournament. Harry would confess that he's scared, that he doesn't want to go into that maze, but he has no choice. Hermione would take his hand and promise that whatever happens, they'll deal with it together, that she'll be right there at the edge of the maze waiting for him to come back. The third task, watching the champions enter the maze one by one, would be excruciating for Hermione. She'd be standing with the Weasleys, who've come to support Harry, and she'd be staring at the hedge walls as if she could see through them to where Harry is. Time would pass strangely, minutes feeling like hours, and the festive atmosphere would grate on her nerves. When red sparks shoot up from inside the maze, signaling a champion in distress, Hermione would jump, her hand going to her wand instinctively, even though she can't do anything from outside. The wait would get more tense as time passes. Champions emerging injured, Fleur eliminated. Victor acting strangely under the Imperious curse, though nobody knows it yet. Hermione would be counting minutes, calculating how long Harry's been in there, whether that's too long, whether something's wrong. She'd be pacing, unable to stand still, ignoring Mrs. Weasley's attempts to get her to sit down and relax. When more time passes and Harry doesn't emerge, when all the other champions are accounted for except Harry and Cedric, Hermione would start to panic, would start demanding that officials go into the maze to check on them. The moment when there's a flash of light from the maze's center, a sense of something wrong in the air, a disturbance in the magic that people can feel more than see, Hermione would go cold all over. Something bad has happened, she knows it deep in her bones, and she'd be pushing toward the maze entrance, trying to get someone to go in, to find Harry. The officials would be trying to calm the crowd, saying to wait just a few more minutes. But Hermione would be beyond reason, beyond calming, because her brother is in danger and no one is doing anything. When the crowd suddenly goes silent, when people start pointing toward the area near the maze entrance, Hermione would turn and see Harry. He'd be on the ground, covered in dirt and blood, clutching the Triwizard cup in one hand and holding on to Cedric Diggory's body with the other. Screaming that Voldemort is back, that Cedric is dead. The world would tilt sideways for Hermione. She'd be running, pushing through people, screaming Harry's name, trying to get to him. The chaos at the maze exit would be absolute. Cedric's father crying over his son's body, Harry still screaming and crying. Dumbledore trying to get information, Fudge denying everything. Moody, who isn't really Moody, trying to separate Harry from the crowd. Hermione would fight her way through, would drop to her knees beside Harry, would pull him into her arms while he shakes and cries. Harry would be babbling about Voldemort, about the graveyard, about Wormtail and the resurrection ritual, about Cedric being killed, and Hermione would be holding him, trying to comfort him while her own mind races with horror at what he's saying. When Moody tries to take Harry away, claiming he needs to get Harry to the hospital wing, Hermione's instincts would scream warning. Something would feel off about Moody's insistence, about the way he's trying to separate Harry from everyone else. She'd refuse to let go of Harry, would insist on coming with them, and her stubbornness would actually save Harry's life by delaying Crouch Jr. long enough for Dumbledore to become suspicious and follow them. The revelation that Moody was Barty Crouch Jr. all along, that he's the one who put Harry's name in the goblet, that everything was a plot to deliver Harry to Voldemort, would make Hermione's earlier bad feelings seem like massive understatements. The interrogation of Barty Crouch Jr. under Veritaserum, listening to him explain the entire plot, how he guided Harry through the tournament to ensure he'd reach the cup first, how it was all arranged to give Voldemort a chance at resurrection, would be sickening. Hermione would sit beside Harry through the whole thing, holding his hand, being his anchor. When Crouch describes the graveyard, the ritual, Voldemort's return to power, Harry would be trembling with remembered trauma, and Hermione would be fighting her own horror to stay strong for him. The hospital wing scene later, with Harry trying to sleep but being plagued by nightmares, Hermione would refuse to leave. Madame Pomfrey would try to make her go back to her dormitory, would cite rules about visiting hours, but Hermione would pull the sister card, would point out that Harry has just experienced severe trauma and needs family present. Dumbledore would overrule Pomfrey, would have a bed moved into the hospital wing so Hermione can stay near Harry, and she'd spend the night sitting vigil, watching Harry sleep restlessly, being there whenever he jolts awake from nightmares about the graveyard. In the days after the third task, Harry would struggle with survivor's guilt over Cedric's death, with trauma from being tortured by Voldemort, with the horror of watching Wormtail murder someone and use Harry's blood in a dark ritual. Hermione would be his constant companion through this, would listen when he needs to talk, would sit quietly when he can't find words, would research trauma and grief to understand how to help him. She'd also be furious on his behalf at Fudge and the Ministry for refusing to believe Voldemort has returned, for starting a smear campaign against Harry and Dumbledore rather than preparing for war. The end-of-term feast, subdued and grieving for Cedric, would be a far cry from the celebration that was supposed to cap off the tournament. Harry and Hermione would sit together at the Gryffindor table, neither of them eating much, both of them ready to leave Hogwarts and this awful year behind. When Dumbledore makes his speech about Cedric's murder, about Voldemort's return, about the need for unity in dark times, Hermione would reach under the table and take Harry's hand, and they'd hold on to each other like anchors in a storm. The summer after fourth year would be the worst yet. Harry back at the Dursleys, isolated and traumatized, with only Hermione's letters keeping him sane. Hermione would write to him every day, sometimes multiple times a day, full of news and research and reminders that he's not alone. When Harry writes back about his nightmares, about the flashbacks, about feeling like he's going crazy, Hermione would research post-traumatic stress, would send him information about coping mechanisms, would remind him that what he's feeling is normal for someone who's been through what he experienced. The correspondence between Harry and Hermione over that summer would become a lifeline for both of them. Harry would pour out his nightmares onto parchment, describing how he keeps seeing Cedric die, how he hears Voldemort's high, cold laugh in his sleep, how he wakes up with his scar burning. Hermione would respond with long, detailed letters full of research but also full of emotional support, reminding Harry that trauma is a normal response to abnormal events, that healing takes time, that she's there for him even across the distance. When the Dementor attack happens in Little Whinging, when Harry is forced to produce a Patronus to save himself and Dudley, his first thought after survival would be to contact Hermione. The letter he sends would be panicked and desperate, explaining what happened, the ministry charges, the threat of expulsion. Hermione's response would arrive within hours via a borrowed ministry owl, full of fury at the injustice and immediate plans for how to fight this, legal precedents she's already researching, arguments they can make. The reunion at Grimmauld Place would be emotional. When Hermione arrives with Mad-Eye Moody's guard detail and sees Harry for the first time since the train platform after 4th year, she'd drop her trunk and run to him, throwing her arms around him so tight he gasps. They'd hold each other for a long moment, both of them shaking slightly, before Hermione pulls back and starts checking him over, looking for injuries from the Dementor attack, from the summer with the Dursleys. From everything, Harry would look tired and thin. Dark circles under his eyes, his scar red and angry on his forehead. Hermione would see all of this and her heart would break a little, but she'd push it down to be strong for him. They'd stay up late that first night, sitting in one of Grimmauld Place's dusty bedrooms, talking about everything that's happened, everything they've missed in each other's lives. Harry would confess how isolated he felt all summer, how the Dursleys were worse than ever, how he kept expecting Voldemort to attack at any moment. Hermione would tell him about her summer of research, about the book she's been reading on dark magic and Horcruxes even though she doesn't know that's what they're called yet, about her growing certainty that Voldemort has done something to make himself immortal. The Order of the Phoenix meetings would be fascinating for both siblings. They'd be excluded from most meetings as too young, which would frustrate Hermione especially since she knows they have more direct experience with Voldemort than most Order members. She'd press her ear to the door of the kitchen, trying to hear what's being discussed, and Harry would keep watch to make sure no one catches her eavesdropping. The information they'd gather this way, partial and fragmented, would fuel long discussions between them about what the Order is planning, what threats they're facing. Sirius's presence at Grimmauld Place would be bittersweet for both Potter siblings. Their godfather, trapped in his childhood home that he hates, slowly being driven mad by isolation and inaction. Sirius would dote on both Harry and Hermione, seeing so much of James and Lily in them both. He'd tell them stories about their parents, about pranks and adventures, about how James and Lily fell in love. These moments would be precious to Harry and Hermione, filling in pieces of their history that have always been blank. But they'd also see Sirius's darkness, his recklessness, his desire to relive his glory days through them. When Sirius suggests that they should be more involved in Order operations, that they're practically adults and should be fighting, Hermione would be torn between agreement that they should be informed and concern that Sirius is pushing them toward danger for the wrong reasons. She'd have a private conversation with Sirius about it, telling him that they need him to be a godfather, not another soldier trying to recruit them. Sirius would be taken aback but would ultimately understand, would try to be more protective and less encouraging of recklessness. The hearing at the Ministry for Harry's use of underage magic would be terrifying for both siblings. Hermione wouldn't be allowed in the courtroom, would have to wait outside, pacing the corridor and trying not to imagine Harry being expelled, being sentenced to have his wand broken. When Harry emerges, cleared of all charges thanks to Dumbledore's defense and Mrs. Figg's testimony, Hermione would nearly collapse with relief. They'd leave the ministry together, Harry holding her up as much as she's holding him up, both of them giddy with the reprieve. The journey to Hogwarts on the Express would feel different that year. The Golden Trio back together, Ron and Hermione clearly having grown closer over the summer, which makes Harry happy and slightly uncomfortable in equal measure, and the looming threat of Voldemort's return hanging over everything. When they arrive at school and discover that Dolores Umbridge has been appointed as Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher by the Ministry, Hermione would immediately recognize the political maneuvering. Fudge is taking over Hogwarts, she'd explain to Harry and Ron, putting his people in place to control the narrative and suppress the truth about Voldemort. The first Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson with Umbridge would be infuriating. When Umbridge declares that students will learn defensive theory only, no practical magic, Hermione's hand would shoot up with questions. Theoretical knowledge is useless without practical application, she'd argue, and in dangerous times students need to know how to defend themselves. Umbridge's simpering smile and dismissal of the idea that they're in dangerous times would make Hermione's blood boil. When Harry inevitably loses his temper and argues with Umbridge, Hermione would support him even while trying to moderate his approach, knowing that open confrontation with Umbridge will end badly. Harry's first detention with Umbridge, writing lines with the blood quill that carves "I must not tell lies" into the back of his hand, would be something he tries to hide from Hermione. He'd know she'd be furious, would try to intervene, and he doesn't want to make things worse. But Hermione would notice immediately. She'd see him favoring his right hand, would catch a glimpse of the healing cuts on his skin, and she'd grab his hand and pull back his sleeve to reveal the words scarred into his flesh. Her reaction would be ice-cold fury. Hermione would march straight to Professor McGonagall's office, dragging Harry with her, demanding that something be done about Umbridge torturing students. McGonagall, politically trapped by Umbridge's ministry connections, would be sympathetic, but unable to directly intervene. She'd document the abuse, would tell them she's reporting it to Dumbledore, but would also warn them that Umbridge has the full backing of the minister and removing her won't be easy. Hermione would leave the meeting frustrated and angry, determined to find a way to protect Harry and other students from Umbridge's sadism. This would be the catalyst for forming Dumbledore's army. Hermione would approach Harry with the idea, arguing that if the school won't teach them proper defense, they'll teach themselves. Harry would be resistant at first, not wanting to put himself forward as a teacher, but Hermione would convince him. She'd point out that he has more practical experience than anyone, that people need to learn from someone who's actually faced dark wizards, and that this is a way to fight back against Umbridge's control. The organizational meeting at the Hog's Head would be tense. Students from multiple houses showing up, some skeptical, some eager, all of them taking a risk by defying Umbridge's authority. Hermione would run the meeting with Harry, explaining the purpose, setting expectations, addressing concerns. When some students question whether Harry is qualified to teach, whether his stories about Voldemort are even true, Hermione would shut them down. She'd vouch for her brother absolutely, would describe his experiences and capabilities with a fierce pride that makes it clear she'll accept no doubt. The DA meetings in the Room of Requirement would become the highlight of their week. Harry teaching practical defense, Hermione organizing the curriculum and practice schedules, Ron helping demonstrate and keeping spirits up. The room would become a sanctuary, a place where they could prepare for the war they all know is coming, where they could take control of their own education and safety. Hermione would be one of Harry's most dedicated students despite already knowing most of the theory. She'd practice shield charms until her wand arm ached, would work on offensive spells and defensive positions, would push herself as hard as she pushes everyone else. Harry would sometimes pull her aside during practice, concerned she's overworking herself, and Hermione would explain that she needs to be ready, needs to be able to protect herself and him when it matters. Harry would understand, would feel the same desperate need to prepare, and they'd often stay late after DA meetings, practicing together, pushing each other to improve. The development of the romance between Ron and Hermione would add interesting tension to the sibling dynamic. Harry would notice the way they look at each other, the way Ron gets tongue-tied around Hermione when she's dressed up, the way Hermione blushes when Ron compliments her. Part of Harry would be happy for them, would want his sister and his best friend to be happy together. But another part would feel weird about it, protective and uncomfortable, and worried about what happens if they date and then break up and he's caught in the middle. Hermione would eventually come to Harry and ask him directly how he'd feel if she and Ron dated. They'd be in the common room late at night, just the two of them, and Hermione would be nervous bringing it up. Harry would be silent for a moment, processing, before admitting that it's weird, but ultimately okay. Ron is a good person, Harry would say, one of the best people he knows, and if Hermione is happy, then Harry supports it. But he'd also make it clear that if Ron ever hurts her, brother or not, best friend or not, there will be consequences. Hermione would hug him, relieved and grateful for his blessing. The escalating conflict with Umbridge would reach a breaking point when she discovers the DA. The betrayal by Marietta Edgecombe, the hexed parchment revealing who told, the panic as students scatter. Harry would protect as many as he could, but ultimately be caught along with a core group including Hermione and Ron. Standing in Dumbledore's office, facing Fudge and Umbridge and Dumbledore himself, Harry would try to take all the blame, claiming he organized everything without help. Hermione would immediately contradict him, stepping forward to claim equal responsibility, refusing to let Harry be punished alone. Dumbledore's acceptance of blame and subsequent escape from the Ministry officials would shock them all. The headmaster disappearing in a blaze of fire with Fawkes, leaving Umbridge in charge of the school, would feel like abandonment and trust simultaneously. Dumbledore trusted them to continue the fight, but he also left them to deal with Umbridge's petty tyranny without his protection. Umbridge's reign as headmistress would be oppressive. Educational decrees covering every wall, inquisitorial squad students patrolling corridors, the Slytherins under Malfoy enforcing Umbridge's rules with glee. Harry would have an especially hard time called to her office regularly for questioning, subjected to more blood-quilled detentions. Hermione would try to run interference, would try to protect Harry by being a model student herself, giving Umbridge no excuse to target the Potter siblings. But Umbridge would target Harry anyway, because he represents everything she wants to suppress. The truth about Voldemort, resistance to ministry control, the strength to stand up to authority. The dreams of the Department of Mysteries corridor would haunt Harry throughout fifth year. The black door at the end of the hall, the sense of something important behind it, the feeling that he needs to get there. Hermione would listen to him describe these dreams, would grow increasingly concerned as they become more vivid and frequent. She'd research connections between minds, between dreams and reality, trying to understand what's happening to Harry. When Snape is assigned to teach Harry occlumency, Hermione would be relieved that someone is addressing the problem, but also worried about Harry having to expose his mind to Snape. The occlumency lessons would be brutal. Harry coming back from each session raw and shaken, his worst memories exposed and examined by Snape's cruel intelligence. Hermione would try to help, would find alternate meditation techniques, would practice clearing exercises with Harry, but the lessons would continue to fail, and Hermione would become frustrated with Snape's methods, arguing that humiliation and trauma are not effective teaching tools. She'd eventually confront Snape directly about it, and Snape's response to another Potter with Lily's eyes would be complicated and painful to witness. He'd dismiss her concerns coldly, but there would be a flicker of something else in his face when he looks at her. Some reminder of the woman he loved in this girl who shares her brilliance. The vision of Sirius being tortured at the Department of Mysteries would come at the worst possible moment. During their History of Magic OWL exam, Harry would jolt awake from the vision gasping, drawing attention, and Hermione would immediately know something is wrong from across the examination hall. After the exam ends, she'd corner Harry and demand to know what happened. When Harry explains the vision, that Sirius is being tortured by Voldemort for information about a weapon, Hermione's logical mind would scream trap even while her heart would pull toward action. The argument that follows would be one of their most intense ever. Hermione would be begging Harry to slow down, to think this through, to verify the vision somehow before rushing off to the ministry. Harry would be frantic and desperate, unable to bear the thought of Sirius suffering while he wastes time. Hermione would try multiple arguments. It could be a false vision planted by Voldemort. Sirius would want them to be smart, not reckless. They need adult help. Walking into the Department of Mysteries could be exactly what Voldemort wants. But every argument would crash against Harry's certainty that Sirius is in danger and needs them. In the end, Hermione would agree to go with Harry, but only after they try to verify the situation. They'd attempt to use the fireplace in Umbridge's office to contact Grimmauld Place, only to be caught by Umbridge herself. The interrogation that follows, with Umbridge threatening to use Veritaserum or even the Cruciatus Curse to get information, would be terrifying. Hermione's quick thinking, her lie about Dumbledore's weapon in the Forbidden Forest, would save them from torture but lead them into a different danger. The journey into the Forbidden Forest with Umbridge, Harry's silent communication with Hermione through looks and gestures, both of them knowing they need to escape but not sure how, would be tense beyond measure. The appearance of the centaurs and Grop would create chaos that allows their escape, and Hermione would feel guilty about leaving Umbridge to the centaurs' mercy, but not guilty enough to go back. They'd escape back to the castle, gather Ron and Ginny and Neville and Luna, and prepare to go to the Ministry. The flight to London on Thestrals would be surreal. Hermione flying a creature she can't see, trusting Luna's directions and Harry's lead, the night air cold and thin at that altitude. She'd be running contingency plans in her head, exit strategies, ways to call for help if needed. She'd also be praying they're wrong, that Sirius isn't at the ministry, that this whole desperate mission will turn out to be unnecessary. The Department of Mysteries itself would be eerie and unsettling. Endless rows of prophecy orbs, each one containing someone's fate, glowing faintly in the darkness. Harry would lead them deeper, following his vision's memory, and Hermione would be on high alert, wand out, watching for danger. When they reach the correct row, when Harry finds the prophecy orb with his and Voldemort's names on it, Hermione would be reading the label over his shoulder, her mind racing with implications about what a prophecy connecting Harry and Voldemort might mean. The ambush by Death Eaters would confirm Hermione's worst fears. They walked into a trap, exactly as she warned, and now they're surrounded by adult dark wizards in the heart of the Ministry, with no backup. Hermione's tactical mind would kick into gear immediately. She'd position herself back-to-back with Harry, would coordinate with the other DA members, would call out targets and spell combinations. The battle through the department would showcase everything they learned in DA meetings. Practical defense under real life-or-death pressure. Hermione's duel with multiple Death Eaters would be fierce and precise. Shield charms deflecting curses, stunning spells fired with accuracy, creative use of the environment as she transfigures objects into obstacles and weapons. She'd be protecting Harry while protecting herself, fighting a running battle through strange rooms full of mysterious magical objects. The Time Room, the Brain Room, the Death Chamber with its mysterious veil. Each environment would present new challenges and dangers. When Hermione is hit by Dolokhof's purple flame curse in the Brain Room, the pain would be unlike anything she's experienced. A silent spell that feels like her internal organs are being torn apart, and she'd fall, unable to breathe, unable to scream. Harry's reaction would be immediate and terrifying. He'd see his sister fall, see her trying to breathe and failing, and something would snap inside him. The rage that follows would fuel his magic, making his spells more powerful, more desperate. He'd fight like a cornered animal, protecting Hermione's fallen form, while continuing to fight off Death Eaters. The arrival of the Order of the Phoenix would shift the tide of battle. Sirius bursting into the department alongside Lupin, Moody, Tonks, and Kingsley, adult wizards with decades of experience turning the Death Eaters' advantage into retreat. Harry would only have a moment of relief before he has to return to fighting, but knowing backup has arrived would give him hope. He'd keep returning to where Hermione has fallen, checking that she's still breathing, still alive, before being forced to move by the continuing battle. The duel in the Death Chamber between Sirius and Bellatrix would pull Harry's attention. He'd see his godfather laughing as he fights, arrogant and reckless, and then the jet of red light from Bellatrix's wand, and Sirius falling backward through the veil. Harry's scream would be raw and broken, the sound of something inside him shattering. He'd try to run after Sirius, would try to go through the veil himself to bring his godfather back, and only Remus Lupin's physical restraint would stop him. The grief and rage would make Harry vulnerable to possession. When Voldemort tries to possess Harry, speaking through him to Dumbledore, who's arrived at last, Harry's pain would be so overwhelming that it's almost easy for Voldemort to slip in. The sensation of Voldemort in his mind would be violating and terrifying, Harry's consciousness being pushed aside by this alien evil presence. But then Harry's thoughts would turn to Hermione, lying injured and possibly dying, and the love he feels for his sister would be incompatible with Voldemort's presence. Love would burn through the possession, would force Voldemort out, leaving Harry collapsed and gasping but free. The aftermath in the hospital wing would be where Harry finally breaks. He'd sit beside Hermione's bed while Madame Pomfrey works to heal her internal injuries from Dolokhof's curse. The curse hit her diaphragm and internal organs, caused severe internal bleeding, and she's lucky to be alive. Harry would hold her hand, his own still scarred from Umbridge's blood quill, and he'd cry for Sirius, for the godfather they barely knew, and have now lost forever. When Hermione wakes hours later, groggy from sleeping draught and healing potions, her first word would be Harry's name. Harry would be there immediately, bringing his face close to hers so she can see him without her glasses. She'd try to ask what happened, where they are, if everyone is safe, and Harry would have to tell her about Sirius. Watching comprehension dawn on Hermione's face, seeing her own grief mirror his, would somehow make it both worse and slightly more bearable. They'd cry together, mourning their godfather. the unfairness of losing him right when they were starting to build a relationship. Dumbledore's visit to explain everything would come after Hermione is more recovered. The headmaster would address both Potter siblings together, explaining the prophecy, the connection between Harry and Voldemort, the reason Harry was left to suffer at the Dursleys all those years. The revelation that neither can live while the other survives, that Harry will ultimately have to kill Voldemort or be killed by him, would hit them both like a physical blow. Hermione's reaction to the prophecy would be immediate refusal to accept its terms. She'd argue with Dumbledore about predestination, about choice versus fate, about the possibility of finding alternatives. But underneath her arguments, she'd know the truth that Harry has already accepted. This ends with Harry facing Voldemort, and only one of them will survive. The implications would terrify her because she can't imagine a world without Harry, can't fathom losing her brother after everything they've been through together. The train ride back to London at the end of term would be subdued. The loss of Sirius hanging over them, Harry's knowledge of the prophecy weighing on him, Hermione's injuries still healing, it would feel like they've aged years in a single night. Ron would try to lighten the mood, would make jokes and talk about summer plans, but the heaviness would persist. Harry and Hermione would sit together, not saying much, just being together in their shared grief. The summer after 5th year would be different from previous summers. Harry still has to return to the Dursleys for blood protection, but Dumbledore would arrange for more frequent visits from Order members, for shorter duration at Privet Drive. Hermione would write to Harry constantly as always, but her letters would be different now. They'd be full of research about prophecies, about ways to defeat Voldemort, about Horcruxes, though she doesn't know that's what she's researching. She'd be determined to find a way to help Harry survive the coming confrontation with Voldemort, refusing to accept that the prophecy means Harry has to die. Dumbledore's arranged visits to collect Harry from Privet Drive at the start of 6th year would include a stop to also collect Hermione. The headmaster would bring both Potter siblings with him to recruit Horace Slughorn, believing that both of them together would be more persuasive than just Harry alone. Slughorn's reaction to the Potter siblings would be interesting. He'd be fascinated by both of them, by Harry's fame and Hermione's brilliance, and he'd immediately start planning how to collect them both for his Slug Club. The visit to the Weasleys' new home, the increased security, the knowledge that war is coming, it would all reinforce the reality that their childhood is over. Harry and Hermione would spend hours at the Burrow talking strategy with Ron, discussing what they know about Voldemort's past, about what needs to be done. Hermione would share her research about soul magic, about objects that might contain pieces of soul, dancing around the topic of Horcruxes without quite naming them. When they returned to Hogwarts for 6th year, the school would feel different. More security, more fear, students whispering about attacks and disappearances. Harry's private lessons with Dumbledore would begin, viewing memories of Voldemort's past, and Harry would share everything with Hermione. They'd watch the memories together in Dumbledore's Pensieve when possible, or Harry would describe them in detail, and together they'd piece together Tom Riddle's history and psychology. The revelation about Horcruxes would come as confirmation of what Hermione had already suspected. Dumbledore showing Harry the memory of young Tom Riddle asking Slughorn about making multiple Horcruxes, about splitting the soul 7 times. It would be the missing piece of the puzzle. Harry would bring this information to Hermione immediately, and she'd go pale because she'd researched Horcruxes months ago, had recognized the signs in Voldemort's survival of his own killing curse, but had hoped she was wrong about how far he'd gone. The hunt for Horcruxes would become their shared mission. Dumbledore is searching for them, but Harry and Hermione would want to help, would want to be part of destroying the pieces of Voldemort's soul. They'd research together, would discuss possibilities, would try to figure out what objects Voldemort would choose to house pieces of his soul. The ring, the diary already destroyed, the locket, the cup, the diadem. They'd work through the list, trying to understand the pattern. Harry's obsession with Draco Malfoy, his certainty that Draco is a Death Eater, would cause friction between Harry and Hermione. She'd argue that Harry is becoming paranoid, that there's no concrete evidence, but Harry would know he's right. The tension would build throughout the year, with Harry using the Marauder's map to track Draco's movements, becoming increasingly concerned about what Malfoy is planning. The discovery of the Half-Blood Prince's annotated potions textbook would give Harry an advantage in Slughorn's class, but it would also worry Hermione. She'd be suspicious of the book, of the unknown person who wrote all these notes and spell modifications. When Harry uses Sectum Sempra on Draco without knowing what it does, nearly killing him, Hermione would be horrified and angry. She'd demand Harry get rid of the book, would argue that following unknown spells from a mysterious source is incredibly dangerous. The developing romance between Ron and Hermione would finally crystallize during 6th year, and Harry would have to navigate his feelings about it. He'd be happy for them when they finally get together, when Ron kisses Hermione after a Quidditch victory and she kisses back. But he'd also feel a bit left out, a bit like he's losing part of his relationship with each of them as they focus on each other. Hermione would be sensitive to this, would make sure to maintain her bond with Harry, even while exploring her relationship with Ron. The mission to retrieve the Horcrux locket from the cave would be where everything comes to a head. Dumbledore taking Harry, making him promise to obey any order no matter what, would worry Hermione deeply. She'd want to come along, would argue that 3 is safer than 2, but Dumbledore would insist this is something he and Harry must do alone. The goodbye between Harry and Hermione before he leaves would be charged with fear and unspoken worry. Hermione would make Harry promise to come back, and Harry would promise, not knowing if he can keep it. The horror of the cave, the Inferi in the lake, Dumbledore drinking the poisonous potion that shows him his worst fears and memories, Harry forcing the potion down Dumbledore's throat because he promised to obey. It would be traumatic beyond measure. Returning to Hogwarts with Dumbledore weakened and the locket Horcrux in hand, Harry would feel a mixture of triumph and deep unease. The dark mark over the astronomy tower would signal disaster. Harry, frozen under his invisibility cloak by Dumbledore's last spell, would be forced to watch as Draco Malfoy disarms the headmaster, as Death Eaters arrive, as Snape appears and kills Dumbledore with the killing curse. The sight of Dumbledore falling from the tower would be seared into Harry's memory forever. When the spell holding Harry breaks with Dumbledore's death, Harry would pursue Snape in a rage, and the confrontation would reveal Snape's identity as the Half-Blood Prince, adding another layer of betrayal. Hermione would be with other Order members fighting Death Eaters in the corridors when Dumbledore dies. She'd feel the shift in the castle's magic, would see Death Eaters retreating, and would rush toward the astronomy tower with a sick sense of dread. Finding Harry standing over Dumbledore's body, seeing the headmaster's broken form, would be one of the worst moments of her life. She'd pull Harry away from the body, would hold him while he shakes with shock and grief, and they'd stand there together mourning another loss. Another person who was supposed to protect them now gone. The funeral would be massive, attended by the entire magical community. Harry and Hermione would stand together at the front, representatives of everything Dumbledore fought to protect. When Harry tells Hermione afterward that he's not coming back to Hogwarts next year, that he needs to finish the Horcrux hunt Dumbledore started, Hermione's response would be immediate and absolute. She's coming with him. No discussion, no debate, no possibility of her letting him do this alone. Harry would try to argue, would point out the danger, and Hermione would remind him that they've been in this together since they were 11 years old, and she's not stopping now. Ron's insistence on joining them would complete the trio. The 3 of them would spend the last weeks of term planning, gathering supplies, researching. Hermione would be methodically preparing, creating lists of spells they'll need, supplies to pack, information about Horcruxes and where they might be hidden. The weight of what they're planning would hang over everything, but also the determination to see it through. The final feast of 6th year would feel like an ending. So many students not returning because their parents are pulling them out of school for safety. Teachers looking worried and aged. The knowledge that Voldemort is growing stronger, that war is here whether people want to admit it or not. Harry would look around at the Great Hall, at Hogwarts that's been their home, and wonder if they'll ever see it again. The summer before the Horcrux hunt would be spent at the Burrow with the Weasleys. Bill and Fleur's wedding would provide a brief moment of happiness and normalcy before everything falls apart. Harry and Hermione would be hiding at the wedding under Polyjuice Potion, security too serious to risk Harry being recognized. When Kingsley's Patronus arrives with the message that the Ministry has fallen and Death Eaters are coming, Chaos would erupt. The escape to Tottenham Court Road. The Death Eater ambush at the cafe. It would mark the beginning of their time in hiding. Hermione's prepared bag with the undetectable extension charm holding everything they need would save them. The tent, supplies, books, everything thought through in advance. They'd apparate to the first of many camping locations, and the Horcrux hunt would officially begin. The visits to various locations searching for information about Horcruxes would be frustrating and dangerous. Breaking into the Ministry to retrieve the locket from Umbridge would require weeks of planning. Hermione brewing Polyjuice potion again, Harry and Ron learning to impersonate Ministry workers, the risk of discovery at every moment. The infiltration itself would be terrifying and surreal. Walking through the Ministry as it's been transformed by Voldemort's regime, seeing anti-Muggle propaganda, Muggle-born registration commission trials, it would be a glimpse of the world Voldemort wants to create. Retrieving the locket from Umbridge, seeing her conducting show trials of Muggle-borns would make Hermione's blood boil. She'd want to stop all of it, to save everyone, but Harry would remind her they have to focus on the mission, get the locket, and get out. The escape when they're discovered would be chaotic and desperate. Apparating out with Hermione under her own power while Harry and Ron cause distractions, barely escaping with their lives and the locket. But then Yaxley catches hold of Hermione during apparition, follows them to Grimmauld Place, and they have to abandon their safe house immediately. The successive apparitions to escape, Hermione's quick thinking to take them somewhere Yaxley doesn't know, would leave Ron splinched and all of them in the Forest of Dean. Hermione would panic when she sees Ron's arm partially severed by the failed apparition, would be frantically trying to stop the bleeding and heal him with spells she barely knows well enough. The weeks in the forest would be the hardest of their lives. Constant moving to stay ahead of Death Eaters and Snatchers, taking turns wearing the locket Horcrux that weighs on them mentally and emotionally, the stress and fear and cold and hunger all combining to fray their nerves. The locket would make everything worse, amplifying negative emotions, making them paranoid and angry and hopeless. Harry and Hermione would hold it together longer than Ron, their sibling bond providing a foundation that helps them resist the locket's influence. But they'd still have awful fights, would say cruel things to each other, would hurt each other in ways they never have before. Harry would accuse Hermione of not doing enough to find the Horcruxes, would blame her for them being stuck. Hermione would snap back that maybe if Harry actually thought things through instead of rushing in blindly, they'd be better off. And then they'd both immediately apologize, horrified at themselves, blaming the locket even as they recognize there's truth in some of what they said. Ron's inability to handle the locket's influence would culminate in him leaving. The fight would be explosive, Ron accusing Harry of having feelings for Hermione, Harry and Hermione both denying it, Ron not believing them. Hermione would be begging Ron to stay, crying and pleading, and Harry would be caught between supporting his sister and dealing with his own feelings of abandonment. When Ron disapparates, leaving them alone, Hermione would break down completely. Harry would hold Hermione while she cries, both of them devastated by Ron's departure. The next weeks would be just the two siblings against the world, moving from place to place trying to maintain hope while feeling increasingly hopeless about their mission. They'd take turns being strong for each other, one breaking down while the other holds it together, then switching. The discovery of the Deathly Hallows through the tale of the three brothers, Xenophilius Lovegood's explanation would give Harry new hope, but also new distraction. Hermione would be skeptical of the Hallows' existence, would argue that they should focus on Horcruxes, not fairy tales. The tension between them about the Hallows would build, Harry becoming obsessed with the idea of mastering death, Hermione insisting they need to stay focused on their original mission. The capture at Malfoy Manor would be absolutely horrific. Hermione recognizing they're in danger of being identified, using a stinging hex to distort Harry's face before the Snatchers grab them. Being dragged into Malfoy Manor, seeing Bellatrix Lestrange's face light up with cruel glee when she recognizes them. Harry would be screaming Hermione's name as they're separated, as Bellatrix takes Hermione away for interrogation about how they got the Sword of Gryffindor. The torture would be worse than anything Hermione has experienced. Bellatrix using the Cruciatus curse, carving words into Hermione's arm with a cursed knife, demanding answers Hermione doesn't have. Hermione would scream and scream, would try to lie but be tortured more, would feel like she's breaking apart. Harry in the cellar below would be listening to his sister's screams and going absolutely insane with rage and helplessness. He'd be beating against the locked door, screaming threats at Bellatrix, begging for them to stop hurting Hermione. When Dobby apparates into the cellar to help them escape, Harry would be frantic to get to Hermione. The battle that ensues as they escape, with Dobby apparating people out while Harry fights Death Eaters, would be chaos. When Harry finally reaches Hermione, seeing her bloody and barely conscious on the drawing room floor, something in him would break. The protective rage that follows would make his magic stronger, more dangerous, and he'd fight with a savagery he didn't know he possessed. The escape to Shell Cottage with Dobby's death would be tragic. Hermione unconscious and injured, Dobby dying in Harry's arms, all of them traumatized and exhausted. Bill and Fleur would take them in, would give them space to recover. Harry would sit at Hermione's bedside while Fleur treats her injuries, seeing the word Mudblood carved into his sister's arm, and he'd make silent promises about what he'll do to Bellatrix Lestrange when he gets the chance. Hermione's recovery would take days. When she finally wakes, the first thing she'd see is Harry sleeping in a chair beside her bed, clearly having not left her side. She'd reach out and touch his hand, and he'd wake immediately, checking on her frantically. The conversation that follows would be emotional, both of them admitting how scared they were, Harry apologizing for not protecting her, Hermione telling him it wasn't his fault. They'd hold each other and cry, releasing the trauma and fear. The decision to continue the quest, to break into Gringotts and retrieve Hufflepuff's cup from the Lestrange vault, would be made once Hermione is recovered enough. She'd be the one to plan the break-in, using Bellatrix's wand that she took during their escape, using Polyjuice Potion to impersonate Bellatrix. Harry would hate the idea of Hermione putting herself in danger again so soon, but Hermione would insist she's ready, that they need that Horcrux. The Gringotts break-in would be terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Hermione as Bellatrix, with Harry and Ron as handlers, bluffing their way through Goblin security. The revelation that they've been discovered, that the security measures are activating, would force them to improvise. The dragon chase through the tunnels, mounting it and flying it to escape. Bursting up through the stone floors of Gringotts and into the sky, it would be surreal and desperate, landing somewhere outside London with the Horcrux cup and a furious dragon they need to escape from. The three of them would laugh with hysteria and relief. They'd have another Horcrux, another piece of Voldemort destroyed once they figure out how. Ron's return and reconciliation would be complete. The trio back together and stronger for having survived these trials. The vision Harry receives while holding the Horcrux, seeing through Voldemort's eyes that Voldemort knows they're hunting his Horcruxes, that he's checking on them and one is at Hogwarts, would galvanize them. They need to get to Hogwarts, find the last Horcruxes, and this. The decision to return to the castle would be both terrifying and determined. They're going to war. The infiltration of Hogsmeade and Hogwarts would be tense. Death Eaters patrolling everywhere, the Carrows torturing students, Snape as headmaster, Aberforth helping them get into the school through Ariana's portrait, walking through the tunnel to the room of requirement where Neville and other students have been hiding. The reunion with their classmates, seeing how much everyone has suffered under the Death Eaters' rule, would be heartbreaking and galvanizing. Harry's confrontation with Snape in the Great Hall would be intense. Harry calling Snape out as a coward and murderer, Snape trying to capture Harry. McGonagall stepping in to defend Harry and dueling Snape. The other teachers joining McGonagall. Snape being driven from the school would feel like a turning point. McGonagall calling for the houses to prepare to defend Hogwarts while they search for the Horcrux would rally everyone to their cause. Hermione's role in the Battle of Hogwarts would be crucial. She'd be coordinating defensive positions, helping set up protective enchantments, making sure younger students are evacuated. When the battle begins, when Death Eaters and Voldemort's forces attack, Hermione would fight alongside Harry and Ron, defending the castle they've called home for 7 years. The search for the Diadem Horcrux in the Room of Requirement. Draco and his friends attacking, the fiend fire burning out of control. Harry saving Draco even though he's been their enemy would all happen in the chaos of battle. Destroying the diadem in the flames would leave them with only one Horcrux left, Nagini. Harry's realization that he himself is a Horcrux, that Voldemort accidentally made Harry one when he killed James and Lily, would come through Snape's dying memories, Watching Snape's life through the pensive, seeing his love for Lily, his role as double agent, understanding that Harry has to die for Voldemort to be mortal, it would be the worst revelation of Harry's life. He'd watch these memories with Hermione beside him, and when she understands what this means, she'd start crying and saying, "No, there has to be another way. They'll find another way." Harry would know there isn't another way. The quiet walk away from Hermione, not telling her where he's going because she'll try to stop him, would be the hardest thing he's ever done. Leaving his sister without saying goodbye, knowing she'll never forgive him if he dies, but also that it's the only way to save her and everyone else. Using the resurrection stone to see his parents and Sirius and Lupin one last time. Walking into the Forbidden Forest to meet Voldemort. It would take every bit of courage Harry has. The moment Voldemort casts the killing curse and Harry chooses not to defend himself, accepting death to save everyone else would break something in the magical world. Hermione, still at the castle, would feel it, a certainty that Harry is gone, and her scream of grief would echo through the halls. She'd be trying to run toward the forest to find Harry, and Ron and others would have to physically restrain her. When Voldemort has Narcissa check if Harry is dead, when she lies and says he's gone, when Voldemort parades Harry's body in front of Hogwarts' defenders, Hermione would break free and try to run to him. Seeing her brother's body in Hagrid's arms, his face peaceful and still, she'd be screaming denial so loudly she'd damage her throat. The scene would be chaos, people crying, Voldemort gloating. And through it all, Hermione would be trying to reach Harry. Neville's defiance of Voldemort, pulling the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat and killing Nagini, would happen while Hermione is being held back by multiple people. The final Horcrux destroyed, Voldemort suddenly mortal again. And then chaos as Harry rolls out of Hagrid's arms and reveals he's alive. That the killing curse hit the Horcrux in Harry instead of Harry himself. That Lily's protection and Harry's willing sacrifice made him the master of death in the truest sense. Hermione's reaction to Harry being alive would be visceral. She'd break free from whoever is holding her and run to him, hitting him and hugging him simultaneously, crying and shouting at him for making her think he was dead, for scaring her like that. Harry would hold her and apologize, would explain what happened, and Hermione would cry harder because she almost lost him, thought she had lost him. The final battle between Harry and Voldemort would have the entire school watching. Hermione would be standing close, wand out, ready to help if needed, even though she knows this has to be Harry's fight. When Harry explains about the Elder Wand's true allegiance, about how Voldemort can never win, and their spells meet in the middle, the moment would feel like time stopping. And then Voldemort's curse rebounding, the Dark Lord finally truly dying, falling as a mortal man without magical protection or Horcruxes to save him. The victory would feel almost anticlimactic after the intensity of the battle. Voldemort dead on the ground, his followers surrendering or fleeing, and everyone just standing there in shock that it's actually over. Harry would turn to Hermione immediately, and they'd hold each other and cry, releasing years of fear and stress and trauma. The war is over. Voldemort is dead. They survived. The aftermath would be overwhelming. So many dead, so many wounded, the castle damaged, families grieving. Harry and Hermione would help however they could, moving rubble, healing injuries with what little they know, sitting with people who lost loved ones. Fred Weasley's death would devastate their whole friend group, watching the Weasley family's grief and being unable to do anything to help. Lupin and Tonks dead, leaving their infant son Teddy an orphan, would hit Harry and Hermione especially hard because they know what it's like to grow up without parents. The days after the battle would blur together. Funerals and memorials and trying to process everything that happened. Harry and Hermione would be exhausted in every possible way, physically, emotionally, magically, spiritually. They'd often just sit together in silence, holding hands, not needing words to communicate. The decision about what to do next would come slowly. Harry knows he wants to be an Auror, to use his skills to make sure no dark wizard ever rises like Voldemort again. Hermione wants to work in the Ministry, reforming laws and fighting for equality for magical creatures and Muggle-born rights. Ron wants to help George with the joke shop, supporting his brother through grief. The trio would have long discussions about their futures, about whether they should stay together or pursue separate paths. The relationship between Hermione and Ron would solidify during this period. They'd been through too much together to waste time being uncertain. Within a year they'd be engaged, and Harry would be genuinely happy for them, even as he feels a bit strange about his sister marrying his best friend. When Ron asks Harry for his blessing, Harry would give it wholeheartedly, would tell Ron that he's honored to have him as a brother. Harry's own relationship with Ginny Weasley would develop more slowly. They'd reconnect after the battle, would start dating seriously, and Hermione would approve because she's always liked Ginny and appreciates seeing Harry happy. When Harry proposes to Ginny, he'd tell Hermione first. Nervous about how she'll react, and Hermione would hug him and tell him that Ginny is perfect for him. The years following the war would be busy and healing in turns. Harry and Hermione both starting their careers, working to rebuild the magical world. Ron and Hermione's wedding would be beautiful and emotional, Harry walking Hermione down the aisle since they have no father to do it. His speech at the reception would make everyone cry, talking about his sister and how proud he is of her, how far they've come from two scared kids reuniting on a train platform. Harry and Ginny's wedding would be equally emotional, with Hermione as Harry's best woman standing beside him. The Potter siblings, both married to Weasley siblings, making them family in even more ways, would feel right and good. The birth of Harry's children would be significant events. James Sirius Potter, born first, named after Harry's father and godfather, with Hermione present for the birth because Harry wanted his sister there. When James is born and Harry holds his son for the first time, he'd look at Hermione with tears in his eyes and thank her for being there, for everything. Albus Severus Potter's birth would be more complicated. The name honoring both Dumbledore and Snape would be something Harry and Hermione discussed at length. Hermione would understand why Harry wants to honor Snape after learning the truth of his sacrifice and double agent status, but she'd also remember Snape's cruelty to them. They'd agree that Snape was brave and important to defeating Voldemort, and that deserves recognition. Lily Luna Potter's birth would complete Harry's family. 3 children, a loving wife, his sister nearby with her own family. Everything Harry never had growing up, but always dreamed of. Hermione's children, Rose and Hugo Granger Weasley, would be close with Harry's children. The cousins growing up together, spending summers at the Burrow, celebrating holidays together, would give the next generation the large, loving family that Harry and Hermione created for themselves. The day both families stand on platform 9 3/4, sending their eldest children to Hogwarts together, would be deeply emotional. Harry and Hermione standing side by side, watching James and Rose board the Hogwarts Express, would parallel that first train ride where they reunited. So much has changed since then. They've been through so much, but they're still together. Still siblings. Still each other's most important person. Harry's conversation with Albus before his first year, addressing Albus's fears about being sorted into Slytherin, would be witnessed by Hermione. When Harry tells his son that the sorting hat takes your choice into account, Hermione would add her own reassurance. She'd tell Albus that whatever house he's sorted into, he'll be loved and supported. That house doesn't define who you are. The years would pass, and Harry and Hermione would age into their roles as parents, as leaders in the magical community, as war heroes turned peaceful citizens. They'd have dinner together every week, the Potter and Weasley families gathering to share meals and stories. They'd watch their children grow and flourish, and eventually have children of their own. Sometimes late at night, when everyone else is asleep, Harry and Hermione would sit together and talk about the old days. About Hogwarts and the war and everything they survived. About their parents, James and Lily, who they never really got to know but whose love saved them. About Sirius and Dumbledore and all the people they lost along the way. But mostly they'd talk about how grateful they are to have found each other, to have had each other through everything. How the separation of their early childhood was painful, but maybe necessary to make them appreciate what they have. How being siblings has defined both their lives in fundamental ways. And when they return to their own homes after these late-night conversations, when Harry kisses Ginny goodnight and Hermione curls up beside Ron, they'd both fall asleep grateful for the life they've built, the family they've created, the bond between them that nothing could ever break. This is what would happen if Harry Potter and Hermione Granger were siblings. A story of separation and reunion, of loyalty and love that survives everything the world throws at it. A story of two people who were meant to be family, finding their way back to each other and then refusing to ever be parted again. A story that would fundamentally change the entire series, but also honor what made it powerful. The idea that the family we choose and the love we share can overcome any darkness, even death itself. Thank you for watching this exploration of what could have been. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what other what-if scenarios you'd like me to explore. Until next time, mischief managed. Fifth year begins with the Dementor attack on Harry and Little Whinging, and Hermione would be absolutely livid when she learns about it. Not only was Harry attacked, but he's being brought up on charges by the Ministry, threatened with expulsion, and she wasn't there to help him. When they're finally reunited at Grimmauld Place, the Order of the Phoenix headquarters, Hermione would hug Harry so tightly he can barely breathe, then pull back and start lecturing him about not telling her immediately about the attack, about facing Dementors alone. Their time at Grimmauld Place would be interesting because it's Sirius's family home, and both siblings would be fascinated by this glimpse into their godfather's past. They'd explore together, learning about the Black family, and Sirius would tell them stories about their parents, about his friendship with James, about Lily's brilliance and kindness. These moments would be precious to both Harry and Hermione, filling in pieces of their heritage that have always been missing. The formation of Dumbledore's army would be a joint effort between Harry and Hermione. While Harry has the practical experience and the need to prepare students for what's coming, Hermione would handle the logistics, organization, and recruitment. She'd be the one to create the charmed coins for communication, would organize the schedule, would handle problems that arise. But she'd also be one of Harry's most attentive students, because even though she knows theory backward and forward, she wants to learn practical defense from the person who's actually faced Voldemort and survived. The DA meetings would showcase both siblings' strengths. Harry teaching Expelliarmus, demonstrating shield charms, sharing what he learned from facing dark wizards, and Hermione organizing people into pairs, correcting wand movements, explaining the theory behind the spells. They'd work together seamlessly, and the other DA members would see how perfectly they complement each other, how their bond makes them both stronger. Hermione's relationship with Ron would continue to develop during fifth year, and this adds a complicated layer to the sibling dynamic. Harry would be watching his best friend fall for his sister, and Hermione would be navigating feelings for Ron while being acutely aware that Harry might be weird about it. The tension between Ron and Hermione, the jealousy over their respective dates to various events, would play out with Harry caught in the middle, trying to be supportive to both of them while also being slightly uncomfortable with the whole situation. The relationship between Hermione and Harry would have certain complicated elements that they'd have to navigate, particularly around their bond and their individual autonomy. Hermione, being highly intelligent and capable, would sometimes chafe at Harry's protective instincts, would argue that she doesn't need him to shield her from everything. Harry, dealing with trauma and loss, would struggle with the fear of losing his sister the way he lost their parents. They'd have arguments about this, moments where Hermione would snap that she's not a child, and Harry would shoot back that he's just trying to keep her safe. And then they'd both apologize and work through it because their relationship is too important to let pride get in the way. When Harry experiences the vision of Arthur Weasley being attacked by Nagini, and they rush to tell someone, Hermione would be there supporting him, even though she doesn't fully understand what's happening. She'd see his fear and pain, would help convince the adults to take his vision seriously, and when it turns out to be true, when Arthur is saved because of Harry's warning, Hermione would be both relieved and deeply concerned about what Harry's connection to Voldemort means. The occlumency lessons with Snape would be awful for Harry, and Hermione would be furious on his behalf. She'd research occlumency herself, trying to find ways to help Harry learn to shield his mind. She'd practice meditation techniques with him, would quiz him on mental discipline, would be there after each disastrous session with Snape when Harry is raw and hurting from having his worst memories exposed. Hermione would probably confront Snape at some point, unable to stay silent when she sees how much the lessons are hurting Harry, and Snape's reaction to being challenged by another Potter, this one with Lily's intellect burning in her eyes, would be complicated and painful for him. The vision of Sirius being tortured at the Department of Mysteries would affect both siblings, but Harry's response would be more immediate and visceral because he's the one experiencing the vision. When Harry decides they need to go to the Ministry to save Sirius, Hermione would be torn. Her logical mind would be screaming that it could be a trap, that they should tell a teacher, that this is exactly what Voldemort would want them to do. But her heart would be pulling her toward action, because Sirius is their godfather, their connection to their parents, and she can't bear the thought of losing him. The argument between Harry and Hermione before they go to the Ministry would be intense. She'd try to convince him to slow down, to think, to verify the vision somehow. Harry would be frantic and angry, feeling like she's not supporting him when Sirius is in danger. In the end, Hermione would go with him, not because she thinks it's the right decision, but because she's not letting her brother walk into danger without her. That's what family means. Even when you disagree, even when you're terrified, you don't abandon each other. The battle at the Department of Mysteries would be harrowing, with both Potter siblings fighting side by side against Death Eaters. Hermione would be a force to be reckoned with, her spell work precise and powerful, but she'd also be constantly aware of where Harry is, making sure he's covered, protecting him even while protecting herself. When Hermione is hit by Dolohof's curse and falls unconscious, Harry's world would narrow to pure terror and rage. His sister is down, possibly dying, and the Death Eaters are still coming. The arrival of the Order of the Phoenix would shift the tide of the battle, but Harry's focus would be split between fighting and checking on Hermione's unconscious form, making sure she's still breathing, still alive. When Sirius falls through the veil, Harry's grief would be compounded by the fact that Hermione isn't conscious to share it, to help him process it. He'd be screaming for Sirius alone, and that isolation in his grief would make it even more devastating. The aftermath, with Hermione in the hospital wing recovering from her injuries, would be when Harry finally breaks down. He'd sit beside her bed and cry for Sirius, for the godfather they barely got to know, for the family they keep losing. When Hermione wakes up and learns what happened, that Sirius is gone, she'd cry too, and they'd grieve together, holding each other while they mourn another loss. Dumbledore's explanation of the prophecy, revealing that Harry is the one with the power to defeat Voldemort, would be delivered to both siblings together. Hermione would listen with growing horror and determination. The prophecy speaks of Harry specifically, but in Hermione's mind, this is their fight together. She'd refuse to accept any interpretation that doesn't include her being part of the solution. If Harry has to face Voldemort, then she'll be there with him, and no prophecy is going to stop her from protecting her brother. The summer after 5th year would be a time of deep grief and determination for both siblings. They'd be processing Sirius's death, dealing with the prophecy's implications, and steeling themselves for the war they know is coming. Their letters would be full of plans and research, with Hermione diving into everything she can find about Horcruxes, about dark magic, about ways to defeat Voldemort, even before Dumbledore reveals the Horcrux secret. 6th year begins with Harry's investigation into Draco Malfoy's suspicious behavior, and Hermione would be helping him piece together the clues while also being more skeptical of his conclusions. The dynamic of Harry insisting Draco is a Death Eater and Hermione pointing out lack of concrete evidence would play out similarly to the original timeline, but with an added layer of sibling bickering. They'd argue about it, but productively, pushing each other to think more clearly. When Dumbledore begins his private lessons with Harry, teaching him about Voldemort's past through memories, Hermione would be intensely curious about what Harry is learning. Harry would share everything with her because keeping secrets from his sister has never felt right. Together they'd analyze the memories, discuss Voldemort's psychology, piece together the pattern of Horcruxes before Dumbledore even confirms their suspicions. The revelation about Horcruxes, that Voldemort split his soul into 7 pieces and that's why he survived death, would horrify Hermione on multiple levels. The dark magic involved, the murders required, the violation of natural law, it would all be antithetical to everything she believes in. But she'd also understand immediately that this is what they have to do, find and destroy the Horcruxes, and she'd start researching obsessively. Dumbledore's death would devastate both Potter siblings. They'd both witness it from beneath the invisibility cloak, frozen by the body-bind curse Dumbledore cast on Harry, and Hermione would be there too, held immobile while Snape kills their headmaster. The shared trauma of witnessing that moment would bond them even more tightly, and their mutual rage at Snape would be absolute. Harry's insistence that Snape is evil, that he killed Dumbledore in cold blood, would be supported completely by Hermione this time because she was there. She saw it happen. The funeral would be painful, and afterward, when Harry tells Ron and Hermione that he's not returning to Hogwarts next year, that he needs to finish what Dumbledore started by finding and destroying the Horcruxes, Hermione's response would be immediate and non-negotiable. She's coming with him. There's no discussion, no argument that will change her mind. She's his sister, and they've been in this together from the moment they reunited on the Hogwarts Express 6 years ago. She's not stopping now. Ron's insistence on joining them would still happen, and the trio would be solidified for the final mission. But the dynamic would be slightly different, with Ron knowing that he's joining the Potter siblings on their quest, that their bond is something he can be part of but never quite fully share. It would make his eventual temporary abandonment during the Horcrux hunt even more painful, because he'd be leaving both of them, breaking apart their group when they need to stay together most. The hunt for the Horcruxes would test all of them, but especially Harry and Hermione's relationship. Living in hiding, constantly moving, dealing with hunger and cold and fear, with the Locket Horcrux amplifying their worst thoughts and feelings, they'd have arguments they've never had before. Harry would sometimes lash out in frustration, and Hermione would snap back, and they'd both say things they don't mean. But they'd also apologize, would hold each other through nightmares, would take turns being strong when the other is weak. When Ron leaves, unable to handle the stress and the Locket's influence anymore, both Harry and Hermione would be hurt and angry, but they'd have each other. The weeks without Ron would be difficult, just the two siblings against the world, but they'd survive it because they've always survived together. Hermione's heartbreak over Ron leaving would be something Harry would try to comfort. Even though he's dealing with his own feelings of betrayal, the ambush at the Lovegood house, Hermione's quick thinking with the obliviation spell and the escape would showcase her brilliance under pressure. Harry would be impressed and grateful, even as they're both reeling from learning about the Deathly Hallows and the realization that their quest just got even more complicated. The conversation about whether to pursue the Hallows or continue hunting Horcruxes would be something they'd debate intensely, with Hermione pushing for the practical approach of destroying Horcruxes, and Harry being tempted by the idea of mastering death itself. Their capture and imprisonment at Malfoy Manor would be absolutely horrifying. When Bellatrix Lestrange tortures Hermione, carving mudblood into her arm and screaming questions about the Sword of Gryffindor, Harry would be going insane in the cellar, listening to his sister's screams and being completely unable to help her. The rage and helplessness he'd feel would be beyond anything he's experienced before. When they finally escape with Dobby's help, and Dobby dies in the process, Harry would be holding Hermione, both of them covered in blood and shaking with trauma, and something would break and then reform in both of them, hardening them for what's to come. Hermione's recovery from the torture, both physical and psychological, would take time. The scar Bellatrix carved into her arm would be a permanent reminder, and Harry would see it every day and feel a mixture of rage and guilt. Hermione would catch him looking at the scar sometimes, would see the pain in his eyes, and she'd tell him that it's not his fault, that they're in this together, that Bellatrix's cruelty doesn't change anything about who they are or what they mean to each other. The break-in at Gringotts, riding the dragon to escape, the chaos and danger of it all, would be another example of their seamless teamwork. They'd trust each other implicitly, knowing that when one moves, the other will cover them, that they're safer together than they could ever be apart. The Horcrux in Bellatrix's vault, Hufflepuff's cup, would be another piece of Voldemort's soul destroyed, bringing them closer to their goal. The return to Hogwarts, the final battle, would see both Potter siblings fighting side by side through the chaos. When Harry realizes he has to die, that he's the final Horcrux and Voldemort can't be defeated while Harry lives, his first thought would be of Hermione. How can he leave her? How can he walk to his death knowing it will destroy his sister? The decision would be the hardest thing he's ever done, and he wouldn't be able to tell her, wouldn't be able to say goodbye properly because she'd stop him, would try to find another way, would refuse to let him go. Harry's walk into the Forbidden Forest, seeing his parents and Sirius and Lupin in the Resurrection Stone. He'd wish Hermione could be there to see them too, to hear their mother tell them both how proud she is. When he faces Voldemort and allows himself to be hit by the killing curse, his last thought would be of Hermione, hoping she'll forgive him, hoping she'll be able to move forward and live a full life even without him. In the moment of Harry's apparent death, when Voldemort has Narcissa Malfoy check if he's alive, and then announces Harry Potter's death to the defenders of Hogwarts, Hermione's reaction would be volcanic. She'd scream denial, would try to run toward the forest, toward the Death Eaters carrying Harry's body. It would take multiple people to hold her back, Ron certainly among them, and her grief would be raw and terrible to witness. The idea that Harry is gone, that her brother is dead, that they failed, it would be unbearable. When Harry reveals himself alive, when he challenges Voldemort for the final time and their last duel begins, Hermione would be frozen in shocked relief and hope. Watching the duel, watching Harry disarm Voldemort and win, finally defeating the Dark Lord who's haunted their entire lives, Hermione would barely breathe until it's over. And when Voldemort falls truly and permanently dead, when the battle is won and Harry is alive and walking toward her, Hermione would run to him and they'd collide in a hug so tight it's almost painful, both crying and laughing and unable to quite believe they survived. The aftermath of the battle would be processing trauma and grief. So many dead, so much destroyed, but Harry and Hermione would face it together. The funerals for Fred Weasley, Lupin, Tonks, Colin Creevey, and 50 others would be attended by both siblings, mourning together. The slow process of healing and rebuilding would be something they'd do side by side, supporting each other through the nightmares and the survivor's guilt and the difficulty of adjusting to peace. The question of what happens next, once the dust settles, would be interesting for the Potter siblings. In the original timeline, Harry becomes an Auror, Ron joins him, and Hermione goes into the Ministry working on magical creature rights and eventually becoming Minister of Magic. But with Harry and Hermione as siblings, their paths might intertwine more closely. They'd have long conversations about their futures, about what they want to do with their lives now that Voldemort is gone and they're finally free to choose. Harry might still be drawn to being an Auror, wanting to use his skills to protect people and make sure no other dark wizard rises to power. Hermione, with her brilliance and her drive to improve the wizarding world, would likely still pursue a career in the Ministry, working to reform unjust laws and promote equality. But they'd be each other's closest advisors and confidants throughout their careers. The Potter siblings who saved the wizarding world now working to make it better. Their relationship with Ron would continue to be important, and Ron's marriage to Hermione would make him officially family, Harry's brother-in-law. Harry's role in their wedding would be emotional, walking Hermione down the aisle since they have no parents to do so, giving her away to his best friend, seeing her happy and knowing she deserves every bit of joy after everything they've been through. Harry's own eventual marriage, probably still to Ginny Weasley, would be attended by Hermione as his most important family member, her blessing meaning everything to him. The Potter siblings having children would create the next generation, and the bond between Harry's children and Hermione's children would be special. Cousins who are more like siblings, just as their parents were siblings by love, if not entirely by blood. James Sirius Potter, Albus Severus Potter, and Lily Luna Potter would grow up alongside Rose and Hugo Granger Weasley, all of them hearing stories about how their parents saved the world, how Aunt Hermione and Uncle Harry were the unbreakable team that defeated Voldemort. The naming of Harry's children would have additional significance. Albus Severus Potter's middle name, still honoring Snape despite everything, would be something Harry and Hermione would have discussed at length. Hermione would understand Harry's complicated feelings about Snape better than anyone, would know about the memories Harry witnessed of Snape's love for their mother Lily, and would support Harry's decision to honor that sacrifice even though they both watched Snape kill Dumbledore. Years later, when Harry and Hermione are sending their oldest children off to Hogwarts together, standing on platform 9 3/4 watching the Hogwarts Express prepare to depart, they'd have a moment of reflection. They'd remember their own first train ride, the tearful reunion of two siblings who'd been separated too long, the beginning of the adventure that would define their lives. And they'd look at each other and smile, knowing that despite everything they've faced, despite all the loss and pain and fear, they have this. They have each other, they have their families, they have peace. The legacy of Harry and Hermione Potter as siblings would be one of unbreakable loyalty, of love that conquered death itself, of two people who refused to be separated by circumstance or fate. Their story would be told for generations, not just the story of the boy who lived in the brightest witch of her age, but the story of a brother and sister who found each other again and then saved the world together. In this alternate timeline, so much would change, but the core of who Harry and Hermione are would remain the same. Harry would still be brave and loyal, willing to sacrifice himself for others. Hermione would still be brilliant and determined, using her intelligence to fight for what's right. But together, as siblings, they'd be more than the sum of their parts. They'd be a reminder that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about standing by each other through the darkest times, about refusing to give up on the people you love. The wizarding world would remember them not as individual heroes, but as a unit. The Potter siblings who stood together against the darkness and won. Their names would be spoken in the same breath, their achievements celebrated together, because that's how they faced everything, together. And in the end, that bond, that sibling love that survived separation and trauma and war, would be the real magic, the real power that Voldemort could never understand or defeat. This is the story of what if Harry Potter and Hermione Granger were siblings. A story of loss and reunion, of loyalty and love, of two people who were meant to be family finding their way back to each other and then refusing to ever let go. It's a story that would have changed the entire series in fundamental ways, but it's also a story that honors what made the original so powerful, the bonds of friendship and family that give us strength to face impossible odds. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into what could have been. If you enjoyed exploring this alternate timeline, please like this video and subscribe for more Harry Potter what-if scenarios. Let me know in the comments what other changes you think would happen if Harry and Hermione were siblings, or what other alternate timelines you'd like me to explore next. Until next time, keep the magic alive, and remember, the ones who love us never really leave us. You can always find them in here, in your heart.